I'm Phil from Blonde, Planning Director of Irn-Bru's digital agency, and I have my client Martin Steele, who's Senior Brand Manager with you. We're going to tell the story of how a piece of Irn-Bru film content called Fanny went from a single post on Twitter to 1 million views on YouTube in the space of 4 weeks. Martin's going to talk a little bit about the brand and the commercial context for the story, and then I'll tell the story itself, basically. So do you want to take it? I'll be mouse jockey for you.
Afternoon. This reminds me a little bit of being at university. You've got all the SWATs down the front, and then all the cool kids up the back. Yeah. Right. Just before we kick off, just for my interest more than anything else, can you put your hand up if you haven't tried Irn-Bru? It's not a lot, actually. It's encouraging. Good, good. Sales in the south are growing. Well, for those of you who haven't, Irn-Bru is you click on for that, yeah. Irn-Bru is a soft drink. Yeah, it's got 32 flavours in it, which is quite surprising when you think about it. 32 mixed flavour-based drink, and the brand itself is made to a secret recipe. Okay, this is absolutely true. So the family that started Barr's the company. Still have a very kind of key role to play in our business. And Robin Barr, who's about 75 years old, comes in every month and he mixes what we call essence. It's like a kind of thick syrup up in Glasgow, and he creates this in a secret room. Okay? Now, I've worked in the brand for 9 years and I've never been in the room. I've seen it from afar, but I've never actually been inside it. And he mixes this essence in Glasgow and it's shipped all over the world. It's taken from Glasgow and it's put to the 4 corners of the earth, and that happens every single month. So the product itself is very, very unique and very, very different. And the brand is kind of, for those of you who have seen our advertising, the brand is very unique and very different as well. And it's steeped very much in the history of the product, because the brand goes far back to 1901, where it was born in the kind of dockyards of Glasgow. And you had all these kind of rough and tumble shipyard builders who would get ready in the morning. They'd make their packed lunch, they'd put their packed lunch or sandwiches in the box, they'd put an apple in the box, and they'd stick a can of Irn-Bru in there. And they'd go down to the shipyards and they'd build these ships on the Clyde in Glasgow, and they'd use their Irn-Bru to get them through, which was really tough work. You know, really kind of gritty, hard manual labour. And Irn-Bru was a kind of tonic, if you like, that got them through this very kind of difficult day. And this year, 2012, we decided to have a look at our kind of core brand advertising proposition. And we've been working to a previous proposition for about 9 years or so, and we wanted to change it. And we wanted to grow measures, scorecard measures on the brand. I wanted to start in Scotland, try it out, and then roll it down to the south of England, and if it was successful, kind of roll it out beyond the kind of Scottish border. And when we created this new campaign, we came up with a completely different proposition. And the proposition is based on those original thoughts. We went right back into a kind of brand narrative and got into the core thoughts around the brand. And it's based on that idea of Irn-Bru being there for you when you need it most. And in a kind of simple sense, the big idea was that if you're in times of need, Irn-Bru is there to kind of help you get through it. What we did is we created 3 TV adverts and we created 1 viral piece of film. And the viral, as Phil said, was called Fanny. All right? Now, we knew that Fanny at the time was pretty special, but we wanted to keep it to a particular point in the campaign. And we ran 3 TV adverts in Scotland, and we saw our brand scores, our scorecard, go through the roof. We saw loyalty, and Irn-Bru in Scotland has a very high degree of loyalty. Our penetration's around kind of 76%, but we saw loyalty jump by 30%, and we knew we had a great campaign. And it was based on this core insight, going back to the brand's heritage around Irn-Bru being there for you in difficult situations. Now, the first advert we created was to do with a boy, and he was a kind of teenager, and he came in from a day at the kind of university, and he walked into his lounge, and he was met with a very, very difficult situation. Let's click on. Got his mum and dad in the throes of it. Okay? And the idea is, around this campaign, that these situations are palatable because you have Irn-Bru. So at first, clearly, he is shocked, and he takes a drink of his Irn-Bru and he's able to deal with the situation. And as the advert unfolds, you can see in the back there's a kind of shadow on the curtain. there's a man called Mr. McTaggart who's behind the curtain, and just as he's about to be able to deal with this horrible situation, he opens the curtains to find Mr. McTaggart in a very large pair of white underpants. But his Irn-Bru there is there to help him get through it. The second advert we released was to do with a guy, again coming back from a day's work, and he got into his flat to find that his girlfriend had moved in and turned his flat pink. Not only that, the mother-in-law had moved in as well. So the adverts have this degree of escalation within them where things get progressively worse, but Irn-Bru is there to kind of see you through. And then the last advert that we ran on TV was to do with a guy turning up for a blind date, and it wasn't quite what he bargained for. It was a very kind of large Glaswegian girl, and he was a kind of small, kind of weedy guy, and there was a very, very much of a kind of mismatch there. But the key thing at the end of the campaign was that when he was just about to kind of settle in and get into the kind of throes of the date, she turned around and told him that she'd brought her 4 kids along with her. So he had another obstacle to overcome, and Irn-Bru was there to help him. And then that last piece, in the piece that Phil's going to talk about around Fanny, was a commercial that kind of still works to this construct of things happening in a bad sense, and then Irn-Bru being there to help you get through it. So I'll just play the ad and you can have a look.
So, what are we going to call her?
Fanny. I want to call her Fanny.
We can't call her Fanny. Fanny, eh? I like it. It's unusual, unique.
My mum's a Fanny. Granny was a Fanny. She'll be joining a long line of Fannies.
Aye, it's good to keep up traditions.
Oh, Fanny, you're just like your daddy.
That's my favourite bit at the end, when he thinks he's through the worst of it, they just all gang up on him and say he's just like his dad. You can imagine. So the brief into Phil and the team at Blonde was quite simple, actually. It was to take this core idea of Irn-Bru gets you through and the sentiment that sits behind it and really start to amplify it and start to exploit it as a thought. If you click on Phil. We launched Fanny online, and Phil will explain how we did that. And part of the subcontext of this particular brief was, we're not going to put it on TV, and we clearly weren't thinking of doing that at that point in time, but can we treat it in such a way that it's like a TV advert? And the results that Phil will share with you are hopefully quite impressive. Phil?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as it says here, there are worse social media strategies than being told by your client to go and have fun with Fanny, basically. And that's what we did. I guess my role as planner in this situation is to try and stop the creative guys running away with themselves. And quite often, they tend to try to add too much value to what's already a really, really good idea. And my job is to sort of strip that away and not let creativity get in the way of a really, really good idea. So just a quick example of the sort of thing we did is a very simple Twitter lottery mechanic. We produced these magnets that said Fanny on them, if you see what we did there. And then we had about 50 of these to give away on Twitter. And in order to have a chance of winning one, you just had to declare yourself, I'm a Fanny, on Twitter, and that entered you into this Twitter lottery. And as one of the previous speakers said, people go nuts for free stuff. They went sufficiently nuts with this that we trended in Glasgow there, just under Ed Miliband for I'm a Fanny. So this is the kind of stuff you can do when you've got a really, really good piece of content to play with. The main part of this story is not what we did around the film, but what we actually did with the film itself and how we got it to 1 million YouTube views, and how really is the operative word here. We know what happened. It's more about here and how that happened. And because we'd already run 3 TV commercials and this was internet only, and we knew it was going to be really, really good, we felt, I guess, a little bit braver than we normally would be with a seeding strategy, where normally you would chuck the kitchen sink at something to get as much profile as you can, as quickly as you can. We thought we'd do something different with this. And what we would do is we'd just give the link, the YouTube link, to a single fan of the brand, and they would post a single tweet with that YouTube link, and then we'd see what happened. So we ran another sort of Twitter lottery mechanic to choose who our fan would be that was going to launch this. And we put out a single word tweet, irnbrufanny.com, So no one knew what this association between Fanny and Irn-Bru was at this point, and we just hoped that that single word tweet would be sufficiently intriguing to get people to go to the landing page that where, you know, it was basically explained that, you know, do you want to be the person that launches our new ad? And about 600 people did so. They entered, and I'm just trying to keep this on rails now. Cut a long story short, this girl here, Rachel from Motherwell, 23-year-old media student and self-declared Irn-Bru addict, she was our chosen person. When we met her, she had 153 followers, so we did not pick the person with the biggest following. We literally picked at random, did some due diligence to make sure she wasn't putting out unsavory tweets and wouldn't embarrass the brand, and then she was the person we went with. So as I say, 153 followers when we found her. At the same time as this was going on, because we wanted to see what was going to happen from this single tweet, we were speaking to our friends at sister agency Face, who do really, really clever things with social data. And they, through the, I won't go into the detail here, but this Twitter API called Topsy, this tracking tool called Topsy, we tracked every single mention of that YouTube link on Twitter in all its various formats, so Tcode, bit.ly, all that. Every time this YouTube link was mentioned on Twitter, we would pick it up from that single source, who was Rachel. Before she tweeted the link, we did everything we could to get her up from 153 followers, so we put tweets out like this, telling people that if they wanted to see the new ad first, they had to follow her. So we're basically pimping her. We got her up to 329, which is still pretty modest following, but there's a hidden story behind that, because behind the scenes, we were doing our best to make sure that amongst these new followers, there's some pretty heavy hitters on Twitter in Scotland. And rather than just sort of going out with a begging bowl and asking influencers to please retweet our link when this girl tweets it, we actually tried to put some value in it for these people as well. So we came up with this idea of the most influential tweeter in Scotland, and this was a post we put on the Blonde blog. And because we were tracking the data, we'd be able to see which people generated the most reactions when they tweeted the YouTube link. And as measured by number of retweets, we could find the most influential tweeter in Scotland. So there was something in it for these guys for taking part, rather than us just asking them to do it for us. So that was going on behind the scenes to get these influencers on board. And then on May the 20th, that was the launch tweet. One single tweet from Rachel. 127 of her 329 followers retweeted that link. So that was our seeding. That was the moment of seeding for this campaign. And what I'll show you now is the first of a few visualizations of the data that we were pulling back. So this first visualization is 24 hours later. And what it shows you is who tweeted the link in the first 24 hours and how many retweets they got. And Martin from the IPM called it the exploding chrysanthemum diagram. But there it is. So each red dot on there is someone who has tweeted the YouTube link, and each black line is a reaction technically, but it's mainly retweets. So Rachel's up there, top left-hand corner. She gets 127 retweets, and in this first 24 hours, it's all about several dozen big, heavy-hitting Twitter people, all generating between 10 and 50 retweets each. That's what was driving this. The guy at the very top there is the second most influential tweeter by this measure. So for example, this guy Richard Mackay, who runs his own flooring company in Glasgow, but he's a social media evangelist, 50,000 followers. That's the kind of person who was following Rachel because of that most influential tweeter in Scotland thing. So that was 24 hours into the campaign. It was all influencer driven. The next chart shows you the daily YouTube views that we were picking up at the same time. So you can see there on the left, the orange line, or each orange dot is the number of views per day. You can see we got to 100,000 views pretty quickly in that first 24 hours, and then 250,000 within 3 days. Well, that tails off really, really quickly, and then it settles down at between 15 and 20,000 views on YouTube per day. And because we're collecting the data, what we can see is that the network dynamics in the next 3 weeks are incredibly different from those first 24 hours. And this is sort of shown on the next one. So I will explain this. This is every grey node on here is someone who tweeted the link. The last diagram showed the lines were retweets. This is not retweets. Every red line on here is a connection between one person who tweeted the link and somebody else. So if a red line joins two nodes, it means you've got two things in common. Firstly, you tweeted the link, and secondly, you're either following or followed by somebody else who tweeted the link. And what it showed us is that in that 3 weeks, it wasn't about big influential accounts. It was about small groups of people, each tweeting a link, getting maybe 1 or 2 or 3 retweets each, and it was just being passed between smaller and smaller groups. And when you get up really close, it's really densely networked, and it was just being handed, the baton was being handed from one group of 4 or 5 to another group of 4 or 5, etc. And that's what we saw on Twitter. Very similar to what this guy Paul Adams, who was the bad parent who left his kids on the mat in the presentation from Luke earlier. He wrote this book, and he's got access to all the big data on Facebook. And he is firmly of the opinion, having seen that data, if you're serious about word of mouth, it's not about big influencers, it's about small groups of people, and you generate content that's got reasons to be passed between small groups of people. And we saw the same thing on Twitter for this campaign. So it's all about having what I call barbed content, something that's got lots of hooks, lots of reasons for small groups of people to pass it from one to the other. And in this Fanny film, we had 3, I guess. 1 is it's funny, which is a pretty universal reason for someone to share something with someone else. 2, in Scotland, it's Irn-Bru, which is another reason for people to talk about it. And 3 was the nature of the content itself. It was more bold, more daring, I guess, than your average piece of advertising, and that in itself helps to earn the word of mouth. So there were 3 potential reasons why someone would share this. I'm going to skip the next chart because I've got people up there looking at me saying, come on, come on, come on. But this is just another example of barbed content. So, first 24 hours, lots of influencers getting between 10 and 100 retweets each. Next 3 weeks is lots of small groups of people, each getting 1, 2, or 3 retweets each. It's very, very different. Because we were getting lots of traction, and we went through 500,000 views, and a decision was taken to run this piece of film on TV, which was never the original plan. And it was given literally a handful of spots during the Euro 2012 football championships. I mean, it really was. You could count them on one hand. I think Martin was saying it's about 100 ratings we got. But the impact on Twitter mentions and YouTube views was quite spectacular. So I've added in here. So we've got to, so I'm going to shout, we've got to about 675,000 views here. TV went on there on the 11th of June. And this is the number of YouTube views over the next 24 hours. We went through 1 million in about 48 hours after that. So TV had a huge impact on the number of social media mentions. But again, because we could see the data, we could see that the type of mentions was very different, again, from what had gone before. So that was the situation on May 21st, 24 hours in. The next one is on June the 13th, which is 2 days after the TV went on air. And you can sort of see this explosion of mentions in the middle there. So we'll just compare and contrast. That's all influencers. And then the middle of that gets really, really dense with TV-generated mentions. And it's actually clearer on the next chart. So you've got Rachel there, her launch thing, and then there's this outer ring of high-influence people all getting lots of reactions. Then you've got 2 inner rings, which is the 3 weeks of this link being retweeted 1 or 2 times, being passed from hand to hand through small groups. And then that dense mass in the middle of mentions coming from the TV. So, and what you can see in here, thousands of mentions, but typically getting no retweets whatsoever. So people were sharing the link, people might be clicking on the link and viewing it on YouTube, but they were getting no networked reaction whatsoever. So it's a huge reach, but it was unnetworked reach. So all the reach we'd got before was getting personal endorsement and that sort of stuff. TV was giving us a different kind of reach. It's quite interesting. Just a different view of the data. This is all mentions of the YouTube link on Twitter. It has a very similar shape to the YouTube views graph. The dark blue line is all mentions, and the light blue is reactions or retweets. So although we got more mentions as a result of TV, you can see that the actual reactions generated were as great, if not greater, during the word of mouth phase of this campaign. And the scale there is in hundreds. What I can also do is look at the same graph, but only looking at mentions that generated at least 2 retweets. And this is what you got here. And what you can see is at the far left there, when it was Rachel's launch tweet and then by word of mouth, you can see that you're more likely to be getting retweets and social endorsement in the word of mouth phase than we were after the TV. So it's very, very complementary roles of TV and social media. I am acutely aware I'm rattling through this. I hope the story is coming across clearly, because I'm at the so what phase now. So yeah, and the scale there is obviously lower, and much fewer tweets actually getting reactions than not. So that's all very interesting. We collected a load of data. We saw 3 very different network dynamics: influencers, word of mouth through lots of small groups, and then this unnetworked single mentions as a result of TV. It has been quite influential on what we're doing for the campaign planning in 2013 in a number of ways. Firstly, this idea of operating between the lines in terms of content strategy. So first of all, if you're serious about getting earned media and word of mouth, there's an invisible line that you've got to cross. To the left of that line, nothing happens. To the right of that line, you are sufficiently entertaining or relevant or informative to capture the imagination and get shared versus all the other content people are seeing. So you've got to cross that line, but you don't know where it is. But at the same time, you mustn't overstep the mark. Now, that might be, your brand has values that mustn't be violated by your content strategy, or it might be regulation in your industry. But an effective content strategy is about defining where those lines lie and what between the lines actually looks like for your content. So that was one thing. Second, and this is really important, was really feeling at first hand how content was shared by word of mouth through lots of small groups of people, each of whom having maybe a different reason for doing so. And yes, influencers were important in terms of lighting the blue touch paper for this case study, but we see influencers very much as a tactic, not a strategy, and we wouldn't base a whole word of mouth strategy on influencers. And I think the third thing that we learned was, because we never planned to put this on TV initially, but we had some really, really good results by sharing the film before the TV air date. And I think we can learn a lot from film studios who really, really go to town on their film assets before it actually gets released in cinemas. And I think advertisers tend not to really work that before the air date period. And it's something that we really, really learned almost by accident through this case study. And that is the end of that story on rails. I hope it was clear to follow. I was aware that I was rattling through it at pace, so I hope that was interesting.